Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth, and fancy seeing you here in June. I'm more than welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. Welcome back to Big Mouth. You can keep this conversation going with yours truly over on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. And welcome to my latest video, Star Wars Exposed. It was going to be the fantasy ticket. Disney buying Star Wars. Bob Iger manipulated George Lucas into selling it to him. He worked hard with him. He was clever at doing it. He did the same thing with Marvel, and it worked. But so why has Star Wars under Disney become such a disaster? Well, if you look at the MCU formula, and whatever we think about the MCU, there's been one consistent factor from phase 1 to phase 3. And the fact remains that Kevin Feige was the reliable narrator for those films. So although he had different creatives working on those films, he was the one setting out the template. Now, if we go to Star Wars under Disney, there isn't anyone, there isn't an orchestrator, there isn't someone batting up and, conducting the orchestra. Because one thing's for sure, Kathleen Kennedy isn't a storyteller, she's a bureaucrat. And she's, I suppose, a good bureaucrat at that. Maybe she's a bad bureaucrat. I don't know. All I know is she's not a creative. That's the point. So who was running Star Wars? Well, we thought J.J. Abrams. Bad Robot has certainly been involved in every one of these films. But he went bye-bye after The Force Awakens. I don't understand how that was ever supposed to work. Having 3 different creatives involved and running this trilogy, right? So you've got JJ, then you've got Rian Johnson, then you've got Colin Trevorrow, right? How was that going to work? What a messy situation. Now, if you had JJ behind the scenes kind of conducting that orchestra and telling them the kind of narrative he wanted to run through the trilogy, that would have been very interesting. So what happens is Rian Johnson comes in and he's told, look, mate, do whatever the hell you want. It doesn't matter. So Rian Johnson can only be Rian Johnson, as I said before. So he's Rian Johnson. And then Colin Trevorrow's booted out because they don't like what he wants to do, which is insanity. Then all of a sudden, J.J. Abrams got to come back to a project he doesn't want to come back to. But what's even worse about this, J.J. did a good job in elements of The Force Awakens. He sowed the seeds of these questions. Who's Rey? Who's Finn? What's going on here? What's going on there? It was interesting. The only thing I didn't like about The Force Awakens is that Luke's in like 30 seconds of the film. Now, I understand why it was done. It was a great cliffhanger, the passing of the lightsaber, to be continued. Very exciting, very, very interesting. And you can't wait for the sequel, The Last Jedi. And then what happens with The Last Jedi? Because don't forget, before The Last Jedi, we had Rogue One, a very successful film. But again, there's nothing adventurous about Rogue One. It's literally set in the parameters of the Skywalker saga. So everyone loved that film, or a lot of people loved that film. I think it's a good film if you're not watching a Star Wars film. But ultimately, that isn't really a Star Wars film. And it follows Kathleen Kennedy's narrative of identity politics. But let's be honest here. The night it was announced that Lucasfilm was sold to Disney, I was very, very excited. A Star Wars film every year, and this is why George did it. He wanted his legacy to continue, and he thought, look at the MCU, it's a fabulous job. They've done a great job. But it wasn't Disney that made the MCU successful, it's Kevin Feige. He's the conductor. He's got these post-credit scenes. It's the Infinity Saga. It's going to have a beginning, middle, and an ending of the first chapter, which is the first 3 phases. It's genius. But Star Wars didn't have a conductor. It didn't have someone telling them what to do. It was like, right, just do what you want. Nothing made any sense. Now, the Star Wars stories were a good idea. But again, the Star Wars story should have been something inventive, something away from the Skywalker saga, and something brand new, or adapting these wonderful fanfics and these books and comics that have been written for years. But they didn't have a conductor. What they should have done was say, right, George, we don't want you writing and directing these films, but we do want you and your young apprentice, and I forgot his name, the guy who was very much involved with the Clone Wars and the animated TV shows. I forgot his name. The young man's a genius, right? He worked closely with George on Clone Wars. It worked. Those two should have been the godfathers, should have played this godfather role, this Kevin Feige role of getting these directors in and telling them what they wanted, right? That would have worked. Also, they threw out George's script for 7, 8 and 9. Big mistake. So the whole idea is that JJ's got this vision. Unfortunately, it's a blinded vision because JJ was only involved with the first film. He wasn't even going to write and direct the rest of the trilogy. So none of it makes sense. So you've got that element of why it went wrong. Also, what went wrong was The Last Jedi. Well, some people liked it. A lot of people hated it. But let's look at The Last Jedi. Why do people hate that movie? I didn't enjoy The Last Jedi, and I've said this a billion times, and I'm boring people about this. I just was bored by it. When I see that end scene, or that penultimate scene of all of them on the Falcon, I'm bored. Is that it? Is that all we get? Luke's gone, Snoke's gone, maybe. I don't think Snoke's really gone, but he's gone, right? And so what you have here is absolutely nothing for a final chapter. That's why Empire Strikes Back works so well. So in exposing Star Wars, we have to look at George Lucas's original trilogy. And George's original trilogy is interesting because his original trilogy is very much like Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. And I have the same opinion of that trilogy, by the way. Now, I prefer Batman Begins to The Dark Knight, but The Dark Knight is the go-to movie. And it's like the original, the OG, right? I prefer A New Hope to An Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I think it's the best film. A New Hope's a very clever film because basically it's kind of sows some seeds in there for a sequel. But basically, if A New Hope failed, you didn't need to make other films. It had a beginning, middle and ending. They kind of even sow that lie that Darth Vader killed Anakin Skywalker. And basically, his shit gets kind of shot down. He's defeated. You don't know if he's dead or alive. But basically, that film can be seen as a standalone film. So George was very clever with A New Hope. But then, obviously, it's successful. He did have a story. He did have more films to make. His original plan was a 9-story arc. Now, for me, personally, if I'm going to buy something and want to make money out of it, I'm going to want the genius who came up with the brainchild, right? The problem was for Disney, George Lucas wasn't very popular with a lot of the fans because of the prequels. Now, I'm a prequel lover, but there are a lot of prequel haters. So he wasn't very popular. And actually, many people who are saying now, oh, why didn't they use George's 7, 8 and 9 didn't want George Lucas involved. And everyone's denying that now. Of course I wanted George involved. Of course I wanted his 7, 8 and 9. I used to pray that he wouldn't die before he could do 7, 8 and 9. A lot of us did. But they didn't use it because they were scared of the fans. Instead of being smart and saying, right, George isn't going to make these movies. He's just going to play a godfather role. He will be the conductor along with his apprentice, and they will run this together. It will be George's script. We will get a filmmaker to adapt this so it's good for a contemporary Star Wars trilogy. They weren't smart because Kathleen Kennedy isn't a storyteller, and they didn't have a storyteller like Kevin Feige. Kevin Feige is also a bureaucrat and a storyteller. It's the perfect embodiment of someone either running a TV show or a film franchise. And so you look at The Last Jedi and you look what was done with that. There didn't seem to be a love for Star Wars in that. It was trying to change Star Wars in the wrong way. Now, I've always been an advocate, like the Terminator franchise. I've always said that if someone went in there and been Schwarzenegger and kind of had this kind of era of ordinary rebels fighting the machines in the future, like a TV show or something, or even a film franchise, that would be more interesting in a contemporary world than bringing back Schwarzenegger every time. Oh no, the Terminator's going to get us. Please, Arnie Terminator, please save us. And they've done the same thing with Dark Fate. No imagination, no adventure, even though that format has clearly failed. And that's why I liked the Terminator film with Christian Bale. It was different. It was contemporary. Now, it wasn't successful. People didn't like it because it was different, but I actually liked it. And they left a little bit of a cliffhanger there. And I think that was a really interesting way of doing it. But a lot of people won't agree. And this is what Star Wars needed. But Disney are not a company who want to take gambles and risks. They want to do sure things. Now, they took a gamble on Marvel Studios and the MCU, but one thing they did through phase 1 to phase 3, they gave the freedom of creativity to Kevin Feige because they knew he was a smart guy. He'd been involved in a lot of films before the MCU, and they knew he was a smart guy, and it paid off. The MCU hasn't been successful because of Disney. It's been successful because Kevin Feige knew how to do it. Now, whatever you think of the MCU, I think they're a bunch of forgettable films, but his format works for the mainstream audience. But as I said before, there's no one there. There's no one there to conduct this orchestra, and there's still no one there to conduct this orchestra. You've got Benioff and Weiss going to do their trilogy. That should be interesting. Let's see what they can do with that. At least they're the conductors, and they'll be there for all 3 films. Now they're talking about Kevin Feige being involved as well in a film. That's desperation because of his name. Personally, you either get Feige to run the franchise or you don't get him involved. This kind of half in, half out, oh, let's announce a Kevin Feige movie and let Kevin bring loads of MCU actors in just so we can spin things all the time is going to be very problematic for the franchise. Again, you just need a conductor with a vision. And there is no one there with a vision. And that's the problem. But when I want to expose Star Wars in another way. Star Wars was never meant to be a franchise that was going to last for 20, 30, 40, 50 pictures. It was never set up that way. George had a 9-story arc, and it worked. I believe the prequels work. I believe the OG works. And I believe his 7, 8, and 9 would have been a great bookend. Even though The Return of the Jedi is a great bookend. Some people don't like The Return of the Jedi. I saw it in the cinema. I love the Ewoks. I love the final battle with Darth. And, you know, Darth makes peace with his son. It's a beautiful bookend. And J.J. Abrams and Disney claiming that The Rise of Skywalker is the real conclusion to the Skywalker saga is, again, arrogant and desperate. All they needed to do was put someone in charge with a vision, and they haven't done that. Now, as I say, Kevin Feige's going to do his Star Wars film. But why? What is it? What's going on? How can he... And he's going to do a Star Wars film. Is he going to write and direct it? Is he a director? Is he a screenwriter? What does this mean? He's just going to produce it. He's going to have an idea for a film and give it to somebody else. And a Russo's going to make a Star Wars film, direct a Star Wars film. Maybe that's the case. It's desperate. It's so desperate. And one of the things here is, and I'll go back to what I've just said, is Star Wars does not work as a 30, 40, 50 picture franchise. There's nothing there. You can't keep on going on and on at the same thing. The only way Star Wars can work is if you come up with a new idea. For example, you close off this Skywalker trilogy and you leave a little bit of a question at the end, and there's new worlds, there's a new threat, there's new heroes. And you have to be pretty clever to do that because, as I say, people are so enamored with the OG, with the Skywalker saga. Can anything ever live up to that? But they bought Star Wars so they could have a theme park, which they've done. Galaxy's Edge has been an absolute disaster. They are actually looking like a company, Disney, who couldn't run a piss up in a brewery. But because Feige did a good job, their Marvel theme park, and I think they've got one, and correct me down below if I'm wrong, but this is the thing. They bought something that didn't really have much of a future unless they gave it to someone with an imagination. So they gave it to J.J. Abrams, but they only gave him one picture. He was never meant to come back. So he comes up with this idea. It's not a fully fleshed out idea, but there's some interesting kind of arcs, laid in there for at least a sequel, a sequel trilogy, right? But he doesn't really understand, because he doesn't truly understand Star Wars. The only person who truly understands Star Wars is George Lucas. And they threw him to the wolves. They bought his company and they didn't know what to do with this franchise. And now we look at the Rise of Skywalker trailer, an empty trailer. Now, there's two options here. Either they are actually going back and reshooting 70% of this film. And by the way, they're not denying that, which is interesting, because normally that would be denied. That's what happened with Birds of Prey. They just went back to do some stunt work. It didn't take long, and they were finished within a month and a half, or whatever it was. But here we've got this empty trailer. So either A, they don't want to reveal the picture to us. They want it to be a surprise. And if it ends up being a good film because of that, that's awesome. Either or, they actually have got a big problem. They don't know what to do, and they're going back. They're testing it. But Disney don't test things with audiences. Disney tests things with people already working in Disney. This is another problem. Because you're only getting people you're friends with, who work with you and for you, telling you whether it's good or not. Probably not even Star Wars fans. Probably not even... Really, the only test audience they need is George Lucas, because he knows the project. But he's been treated like this tired old geezer who doesn't know the modern film industry. If anyone knows film, it's George Lucas. If anyone knows what works and what doesn't work, it's George Lucas. But they don't respect him. And there's another bigger problem with modern day Hollywood. They don't know how to make films. And this is a big problem. George Lucas did, what was that film? Something Graffiti, right? Big hit for him. One of his first movies. It worked. George Lucas knew how to make films. But I tell you what, right? You get Rian Johnson and you say to him, mate, go and watch Field of Dreams, starring Kevin Costner. Don't know if you've heard that film. Or go and Revenge, also starring Kevin Costner. Make a film like this. Not like this, but an original film people can put on the TV in the afternoon. These are films that did good bang, that were critically acclaimed. They weren't record-breaking box office, but these things were kind of self-contained movies. If you ask a modern-day writer-director to do something original like that, they won't have a clue. They are not storytellers. They are not filmmakers. They are people who need $250 million so they have a big CGI budget and they can over-promote the hell out of it and give you 6 trailers and create this illusion of a great event when it's nothing like that. Modern day filmmakers do not know how to make a good film. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were storytellers. That's why they were able to come together with Indiana Jones and create this adventure franchise. It was beautiful. But what Indiana Jones and Star Wars are not are 50, 60 movie franchises. They just don't work. And they found this out when it's too late. But mostly, when you don't have a conductor for the orchestra, it doesn't work. And this is the problem they have. Who is running Star Wars? Kathleen Kennedy. But who is running this? Who is the Kevin Feige? No one. There is no one there. So now they're bringing in Kevin Feige's good name, hoping it could save Star Wars. It can't. You can't. The only way you can save Star Wars, and it does need saving, is if someone very intelligent, a storyteller, runs the whole thing. Oh no. You've got Benioff and Weiss with their trilogy. You've got Kevin Feige with his Star Wars film. There's too many cooks spoiling the broth. This was the problem with the DCEU. Zack Snyder is a very intelligent storyteller. But then they bring in Jeff Johns, then Terrio, then this one. And nobody knows who's in charge. Now that, Walter Hamada is running it, things are starting to work out. Look at Aquaman, look at Shazam, Look at the Joker. You know, things are starting to work out. One mind conducting the orchestra. There is no conductor to conduct this orchestra, and that's the problem. The other problem, of course, and the other reason that Star Wars has been exposed and destroyed is because of the inclusion of identity politics. This is the birth of the fandom menace. And now the fandom menace are leading the narrative. And this has become a big problem. Kathleen Kennedy know who the fandom menace are, believe you me. Bob Iger know who the fandom menace already. After that final Rise of Skywalker trailer, they've already conducted the narrative. They can see that it's an empty trailer. They know how to make this film fail because it's not a manipulation, it's opening people's eyes. We know mostly the fandom menace are on the right of the political argument. We know that. I'm not on that argument, but I do like Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers. I do like world-class bullshitters because they have opened our eyes to what's going on, not just with Star Wars, but with Hollywood. So you look at Star Wars, it's been exposed by Disney, and by the time this is all finished, they'll be begging George Lucas to take the franchise back for absolutely nothing. I can see George Lucas getting Star Wars and Lucasfilm back because they have broken their promise to him. That's the thing. That's the truth. This is how it's all been exposed. And then we got this situation that in the first hour of pre-tickets being sold, that it's broken the record of Avengers Endgame. This is simply not true. We found out that the Ticketmaster who broke this news, actually Disney have got some shares in it. Apparently, I don't know how true that is, by the way. So it's very, look, the situation is very, very bad. We've seen what's happened with Galaxy's Edge. We've seen what's happened with Star Wars since The Last Jedi. That was the film that broke Disney's Star Wars in two, and that was the birth of Fandom Menace. And the Fandom Menace are relentless, and they're never going to let go until these people get someone in who knows what they're doing and gives them the Star Wars films that they want. Now, there's Access Media. Well, Access Media have access. So to keep their access, they have to talk a certain way. So the narrative after The Last Jedi was, this is people, these are men living in their mother's basement, wishing a film was a certain way and blaming people because it wasn't what they wanted. Guess what? Yes, that's how fandom works. We want Star Wars to be Star Wars, but also we'd like something brand new, a new adventure, a new arc, a new narrative. And all J.J. Abrams and the rest of them did was give us more of the same. But what George Lucas would have done, he would have created brand new creatures, brand new characters, and it would have worked. It is nothing to do with Rose Tico or the characters. Those characters have not been fleshed out. They've just been pushed in front of us, and they expect us to do the legwork. That's not how it works. You've got to develop characters. You've got to make them interesting for an audience. And that, my friends, is where it's all gone wrong. And this is how Star Wars has been exposed, and now it's a worthless franchise. Also, the Fandom Menace have been very clever in focusing that merchandise is not selling. It's very similar to what's happened with Doctor Who. Ever since Russell T Davies has left, Stephen Moffat did kind of a good job, but slowly but surely, as he lost interest and lost his mojo, then we become with Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker. And again, it's identity politics. This is not what people want. And the more Hollywood and the entertainment industry push this narrative, the more people like the Fandom Menace will be born. You see, what the Fandom Menace is ordinary people standing up intelligently and talking about movies and saying, do you know what, Hollywood, you don't have the power. You can call us man babies, you can call us racists, you can call us homophobic, you can call us what you want, but your narrative is skewed and you are lying. You have made a mess out of something you shouldn't have made a mess out of. And that's why Star Wars is failing. And at this point, Rise of Skywalker could be a bigger flop than Solo.